1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock.
Ladies and gentlemen, the evolution of rock is about to unfold in a forceful epic of words and music. This monumental broadcast extravaganza is the most comprehensive work ever undertaken, outlining the unmatched potencies of the radio medium and the rock music industry, unparalleled by any other cultural or entertainment facet on the face of the earth. You'll learn why sales of records and music-related items have risen to top those of all other entertainment forms known to man. You will begin to understand how, since the advent of television, radio and records have catapulted to colossal proportions, outdistancing the estimates of even the most astute prognosticators. But most important of all, you will recapture for yourself the evolution of rock and roll, from its early roots in rhythm and blues to Elvis, from doo-wop to folk rock, from the Motown sound of the early 60s to Beatlemania, the British invasion, acid rock, flower power, and the fragmentation of music in the 70s. Full circle, from the roots to a full-scale revival and beyond. From the most basic to the most complex, and every variation in between. This is the evolution of rock, repeating for one immortal moment in the limitless space of time, the musical and cultural highlights of more than 2 historic decades. From Bobby Sox to Blue Jeans, from the Twist to the Twilight Zone and beyond. More than 60 hours of the history that kept the world spinning. The events, the fads, and the theme of the times, underscored by the music that set the stage for the evolvement of a new generation.
1, 2, 3 o'clock.
The evolution of rock, the fun and the fury of the most flamboyant years in the life of our planet is now ready to be recaptured for all eternity. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the evolution of rock, the music that made the world turn round. The world's first pop songs, legacy of Stephen Collins Foster, born white, raised black. His music inspired by the southern panorama of riverboats, plantations, minstrel shows, and Negro camp meetings kicked loose the first Rolling Stones of a patient rock. It would lie like an old bone for 13 years before Thomas Edison would add flesh to the bone with his phonograph, a machine that reproduced sound using tinfoil cylinders. In 14 years, Emil Berliner would flatten those cylinders with something called a disc. It was 1891. Music was more than a pastime. It was a business. Berliner's disc meant artists could sell their music en masse. In 1892, J. Aldrich Libby did just that and pulled off pop music's first million seller.
After the war is over, after the break of war, after the dancers leaving, after the stars are gone, many a heart is aching. If you could read them all, many the hopes that have vanished after the ball.
After the Ball was the cornerstone of an empire that would one day pull down more dollars than TV, movies, and professional sports combined. Its subsidiaries, musical instruments, song publishing, tape and record playback equipment, and concerts would round out this empire into a $10 billion a year enterprise. The century turned. The earth was still flat, except where there was ragtime. The musical courier claimed it was vulgar, filthy, suggestive music. Nothing but ragtime prevails, and the cakewalk with its obscene posturings and lewd gestures. It is artistically and morally depressing and should be suppressed by press and pulpit. It wasn't. To press and pulpit, ragtime was a fad that would never outlast real music. It was that kind of thinking that allowed for the continuing development and exposure of pre-rock rock. Still, 1912 saw the birth of the first golden age of records, an innovative age, packed with new record labels, new artists. The boom continued through the First World War, right up to 1922, when the spiraling popularity of the wireless threatened to drown out the entire record industry. Why buy records when you could wire up your radio and get live entertainment for free? There was the Lucky Strike radio show, Fairy Tales by the Man in the Moon, the Happiness Boys, Weber and Fields, and Amos and Andy.
Hello, George Kingfish Stevens speaking.
Hello? This is Mr. Carter of the Carter Construction Company.
Oh, yes, Mr. Carter. How's you this evening?
See here, what are you and Brown trying to pull? Why didn't you show up on that porch wrecking job this morning?
Well, you see, we spent the whole day today wrecking the porch over at 4565 Amsterdam Avenue.
4565 Amsterdam Avenue? That's fine.
Well, thank you, sir.
That's just great.
We thought it was a nice job, yeah.
The porch you were supposed to wreck was at 666 Riverside Drive.
Live network orchestras were playing the new commercial pop songs churned out by the publishers of Tin Pan Alley, early moguls of the music industry, mostly ex-salesmen out for a quick buck from an already lucrative music industry. They'd hire musically inclined people to manufacture songs for the network radio orchestras. It was an assembly line, some good, some not so good. It wasn't all that mediocre. George Gershwin and Irving Berlin came out with some brilliant music. Berlin, unable to read or write music in the traditional fashion, had a special piano built. It could change keys at the flick of a switch. Music was mechanized. By 1930, there were 12 million radio sets being turned on in America. You got Kate Smith and Rudy Valley, Little Orphan Annie, Captain Midnight, Superman, the Lone Ranger, and Jack Armstrong.
A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-yo silver. The Lone Ranger.
The future will see a truly United States of America, thanks to the efforts of the Lone Ranger.
The 20s had been one big party. The 30s were the morning after.
Margin. You'll have to put up more margin.
Depression.
Margin.
Must have more margin.
Another decline in record sales.
Nothing to worry about. Just a freak run.
Something had to be done. Records needed exposure. Exposure meant sales. Exposure meant radio. And so it was that the record industry turned to what it had first considered an enemy and forged a marriage which lasts to this day. Record companies still depend on radio for artist exposure. Radio depends on the record companies to supply a continuous flow of music. The addition of a soundtrack on silent movies brought yet another mass medium of musical exposure. First star of the new talkies was Al Jolson, a white man who painted his face and tried to sing the color black.
I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm rolling along. Yes, rolling along. You are talking of heaven when you talk of the worst. As a sample of heaven, California's best. Everybody loves a baby, that's why I'm in love with you. Pretty baby, pretty baby. I'm looking over a four-leaf clover I overlooked before. One leaf is sunshine, the second is rain. Third is roses that grow in the lane.
Jolson recorded only the songs he was cut in on for a big piece of the action. He wasn't particularly impressive in an artistic sense, but he was dynamite at the box office. That meant record sales. And from his time on, success in the music industry would be calculated on sales rather than talent. In record company boardrooms, there were only two kinds of records, those that sold and those that didn't. By the mid-30s, pop music was swinging in a whole new direction. Big bands, based on the Kansas City Negro bands of a decade earlier. White swing was king, and band leaders like Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller were ruling celebrities. Musicians like Goodman and Miller, even though both wore glasses and behaved like the well-dressed businessmen they were becoming cult celebrities. Gene Krupa was another. The mad drummer verged on teenage idoldom as he physically assaulted his drums, the sweat spraying from his body, his hands and head nothing more than a blur.
Hey, Gene, how about a little of that bebop?
Soloists were in, and for the first time, the young generation was screaming for its musical heroes. Jazz musicians enjoyed a special status. The jazz man was cool. He had illicit love affairs. He smoked dope. He didn't shave. He wore dirty clothes, lived in basements, and when he played, he took you wherever you wanted to go.
The following program will be interrupted for any important war bulletin.
It's 1943. World War II is almost over. The big band era is slowly dying. Frank Sinatra is happening.
Sweetheart, they're suspecting things people will say.
Frank Sinatra led a mini musical revolution that brought about the end of the big band era. Goodman, Miller, and the rest of them toppled. Solo artists like Sinatra and Bing Crosby had their fans swooning in the aisles. Johnny Ray had them rioting.
If your sweetheart sends a letter of goodbye, it's no secret you feel better if you cry. When waking from a bad dream, don't you sometimes think it's real? But it's only false emotions that you feel. If your heartaches seem to hang around too long, and your blues keep getting bluer with each song. Remember, sunshine can be found behind a cloudy sky, so let your head down and go on and cry. If your heartache seems to hang around too long, and your blues keep getting bluer with each song, well now remember, sunshine can be found behind a cloudy sky. So let your hair down and go right on, baby, and cry.
People think I wrote Cry. I did not. It was written by a black man who was a night watchman in a Pittsburgh dry cleaning factory. And he only wrote it as a hobby.
They called him the Nabob of Sob, professional crybaby, Prince of Wales, the human cocker spaniel who created the feel, the smell, and the atmosphere of what would be rock and roll. The music hadn't been named yet, but it had arrived. On the black side of the dial.
No one can love you the way I do, 'cause they don't know how to love you my way. You give me fever.
It was race music, done by the Negro for the Negro, but listened to by white kids in search of something better. This kind of music was more of a turn on than looking up dirty words in the dictionary. Rock and roll was forcing its way into the musical language. It was the beginning of a musical revolution.
60-minute man, 60-minute man.
Look here, girls, I'm telling you now, they call me Love and Dan. I'll rock 'em, roll 'em all night long. I'm a 60-minute man. If you don't believe I'm all I say, come up and take my hand. When I let you go, you'll cry, oh yes, he's a 60-minute man. There'll be 15 minutes of kissing, then you holler, please don't stop.
Don't stop.
There'll be 50 minutes teasing, and 50 minutes squeezing, and 50 minutes of blowing my top. If your man ain't treating you right, come up and see old Dan. I'll rock 'em, roll 'em all night long. I'm a 60-minute man. 60-minute man.
Call
60-minute man. 60-minute man. They call me Loving Dan. I rock 'em, roll 'em all night long. I'm a 60-minute man. There'll be 15 minutes of kissing. Then you holler, please don't stop. There'll be 50 minutes of teasing, and 50 minutes of squeezing, and 50 minutes of blowing my top. If your old man ain't treating you right, come up and see old Dan. I rock 'em, roll 'em all night long. I'm a 60-minute man, oh yeah. 60-minute man.
60-Minute Man was the first time the full, original phrase, rockin' and rollin', was featured in a song. It established the Dominoes as one of the premier groups of rock, with a style that would be imitated for years to come. Another of those direct forerunners was a group called the Clovers.
Are you blowing your top? Well, I'm just a poor young boy, and these girls about to drive me wild. Well, I'm just a poor young boy, and these girls about to drive me wild. Well, I'm just a poor young boy, and these girls about to drive me wild. To me.
Music to make out by. Never heard on white radio stations, they were dominated by the Bing Crosbys and the Frank Sinatras, along with Hopalong Cassidy, Gene Autry, and Bob and Ray. It was adult-oriented radio.
Be my love, for no one else can end this yearning.
We belong to a mutual admiration society.
My baby and me.
The last time I saw Paris, her heart was warm and gay.
I know why I've waited.
Glossy, flossy, lightweight music. Cultural chewing gum for mom and dad. Bearing no connection and no interest for the restless, growing-up war babies. The world had changed. Songwriters had not. The time was ripe for far-reaching cultural upheaval. The youth audience was ready and more than willing for a change. They had money in their pockets, increased leisure time, and a growing mistrust of the establishment system. As far as the radio stations and record companies were concerned, this teenage unrest was a problem that should be handled in the home. It was none of their concern. Their biggest problem, and one that threatened to destroy everything they had going for them, was television.
Right now in this country, there is one television set for every 1 2/3 person.
Almost overnight, it had devoured radio's major advertisers, the network plays and shows, and the audience. Everything that radio had been taken away.
Television will pass, just like the horse and buggy.
Whether it was necessity or choice, broadcasters were going to have to rethink and redefine the role of radio.
Hello, everybody. Hi, all tonight. This is Alan Freed, the old king of the Moondoggers, and it's time again for another of your favorite rock and roll sessions, blues and rhythm records for all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom. And away we go with Gil Bernal, picking up that tenor horn to blow it strong, and the Spark label and the whip.
It was around 1953 when one of them, Todd Stores from radio station WHB Kansas City, developed Formula Radio, consisting of regular time, temperature, and news reports wrapped around a continuous countdown of the hits. Gordon McClendon followed suit with KLIF in Dallas, and soon stations across the country were into the new type of programming, replete with jingles, sirens, and explosions, introducing the news, and disc jockeys who worked at a frantic pace. Dick Clark recalls these early days.
Well, the people in the radio business were the first to know that there was a revolution afoot because we'd come to the end of network radio. Television was making its inroads on the broadcasting business, so everybody was turning to records. And the men who were on the air with the biggest ratings were picking their own records and playing avant-garde music. It wasn't even called top 40 music. It wasn't called rock and roll. It was just whatever young people were interested in. And there were key men in each city. They became little gods in each town, kings of a small community. And that was the slow evolution to a tight playlist and how rock and roll was introduced.
Generally, the stations played about 100 current records. These new developments, this revolution in radio programming, not only made radio a more viable medium, but opened the door for another revolution that would take place in the music industry.
Boy, there's a real rockin' thing to get us off and rolling on our Tuesday night rock and roll Moondoggers. Gil Bernal, the Moondog Show, Spark Records, and the Whip.
Radio had become the nation's bulletin board, everybody's jukebox, and with car radios, portable. Listenership was at an all-time high. The music was still pretty low. Goodnight Irene made the charts and held down number one for 13 weeks, beating out Nat King Cole, Frankie Lane, and Sammy Kaye. Leadbelly, the man who wrote it, would one day be the granddaddy of folk. But in the early 50s, he was way ahead of his time. If the young people were looking for a musical messiah, they would have to look somewhere else. In May of '53, Bill Haley and the Comets tried to be that missing link.
Crazy man, crazy. Crazy man, crazy. Crazy man, crazy. Oh, man, that music's gone. I said crazy man, crazy. Crazy man, crazy. Crazy man, crazy. Oh, man, that music's gone. When I go out and I want a treat, find me a band with a solid
I had been doing country and western music since I was 7 years old, traveling, and I was a country and western yodeler at that time, called Silver Yodeling Bill Haley. But I always, from the time I was a little boy, loved rhythm and blues music and the great rhythm and blues artists. And I spent a little time traveling with the Medicine Show and passed through New Orleans, learned some of the early rhythm and blues songs. I didn't invent the music. Of course, the music has been played for hundreds of years before myself, the boogie-woogie and what they called race music at that time. Simply, rock and roll music is the combination of country and western and rhythm and blues music. I was the first country and western singer to dare, shall we say, to sing rhythm and blues songs because it just wasn't accepted. Race music was race music, and rhythm and blues was one field, country and western was another. We took a country and western band, sang songs like, for instance, We're Gonna Rock This Joint Tonight. We added a saxophone and drums, and everybody said, hey, what is it? You know, and they wouldn't play it on the radio, but the kids loved it, the jukeboxes loved it, and lo and behold, from that came rock and roll music.
Bill Haley had been around for years, touring the Midwest with a group he called the Saddlemen, blazing trails for the emergence of rock dynamos yet to come, by dabbling in the musical mix that was soon to be picked up and flung into one of the most bizarre marriages of all time. He played country music with rhythm and blues influences. Crazy Man Crazy made enough noise in the market to convince Haley and his Comets to stick with what they were doing. In 1954, they scored their first million seller with a song that was already a top 10 R&B hit for Big Joe Turner. Big Joe did it this way.
Get out of that bed, wash your face and hands. Get out of that bed, wash your face and hands. Well, you get in that kitchen, make some noise with the pots and pans. Well, you wear old dresses, the sun comes shining through. Well, you wear old dresses, the sun comes shining through. I can't believe my eyes, all of this belongs to you. I believe till the soul you devil is now. I believe till the soul you devil is now. Well, Lord, I work as fast as my money goes. I said shake, round and roll. Shake, round and roll. Shake, round and roll. Shake, round and roll. Well, you won't do right to save your doggone soul.
Bill Haley and the Comets did it this way.
I'm like a one-eyed cat peeping in a seafood store. I'm like a one-eyed cat peeping in a seafood store. I can look at you, tell you don't love me no more. I believe you're doing me wrong, and now I know. I believe you're doing me wrong, and now I know. The more I work, the faster my money goes. I said shake, round and roll. 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 Well, you never do nothing to save your doggone soul.
The door had been rammed open.
I would say that the pure type rock was a faster type music with a good hard 2/4 beat, with happy lyrics. But it's a combination of rhythm and blues and country and western music.
Bill Haley and the Comets were a major attraction on the pop music circuit, playing to packed houses all over the United States. Despite their successes on the charts, the group still encountered stiff resistance from white pop radio stations who wanted nothing to do with white rock and roll, black rhythm and blues, or a combination of the two. Record companies felt the same way. They were making tons of money with what they had, and nobody was about to rock the boat.
I believe with all of my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
Resistance to rock and roll was so fierce south of the Mason-Dixon line that white church groups accused the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People of trying to corrupt Southern youth.
Why I believe that is because I know how it feels when you sing it.
They insisted that rock music was the central element in a vast conspiracy to destroy the moral fabric of America.
I know what it does to you. And I know the evil feeling that you feel when you sing it.
Life could be a dream, life could be a dream. Shaboom. Life could be a dream. If I could take you up in paradise up above. If you would tell me I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and open we'll meet again. Boom, ding dong, ding dong, a lang, a lang, a lang. Oh, life could be a dream. If only all my precious plans would come true. If you would let me spend my whole life loving you. Life could be a dream, sweetheart.
Every time I look at you, something is all right. If you do what I want you to, baby, we'd be so fine.
Life could be a dream. Shaboom, if I could take you up in paradise up above. Shaboom, and tell me, darling, I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and hope we'll meet again. Boom, life could be a dream. Life could be a dream, sweetheart. Shaboom, if I could take you up in paradise up above. Shaboom, and tell me, darling, I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and hope we'll meet again. Boom, boom, boom. Ding dong, ding dong, a lang, a lang, a lang, a lang, life could be a dream. Life could be a dream.
I know what it does to you. And I know the evil feeling that you feel when you sing it.
In spite of the controversy, rhythm and blues continued to prosper and be a source of easy money for white pop artists. The Chords' hit, Shaboom, was successfully toned down and copied by a bland white group from Canada called the Crew Cuts.
Every time I look at you, something is on my mind. If you do what I want you to, baby, we'd be so far. Life could be a dream. If I could take you up in paradise up above. If you would tell me I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream, sweetheart. Hello, hello again. Shaboom, and hoping we'll meet again. Boom, shaboom. And I ding dong, a lang, a lang, a lang. Shaboom, ba-do, ba-doo, ba-doo, ba-doo. Life could be a dream. Life could be a dream, sweetheart. Life could be a dream. If only all my precious plans would come true. If you would let me spend my whole life loving you. Life could be a dream, sweetheart.
While white rock and roll was making inroads on the charts, Hollywood was making a brief but notable attempt to cash in on the teenage affluence. Marlon Brando and James Dean gave faces to the rebellion in movies like The Wild One and Rebel Without a Cause, showing that what the youth was after was an entertainment, a lifestyle of its own. Marlon Brando would go on to future rebellions. James Dean would not. James Dean was the first in a long line of counterculture heroes. He portrayed, and he was, the Lost Society. But he was gone. Hollywood would lay back for another year. But the teen rebellion it had brought to the screen would not. The children of rock and roll were marching.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Moondog Rock and Roll Party. Another big Tuesday night rock and roll get-together with all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom. Our big rock and roll party, you know, goes until 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's only 11:25. So have a ball wherever you are. And now, Roy Milton and Make Me Know It.
A few big city radio stations had been tracing the rising success of rock music and were loosening up their programming policies, allowing a trickle of the music to seep onto the airwaves. One of these stations, WINS New York, hired disc jockey Alan Freed away from Cleveland, where he was #1 with his Moondog Rock and Roll Party. WINS knew that if anyone could make the music work, it would be Freed. He was rock and roll's most valuable ally in the 50s. He was its agent, its promoter, its protector. He'd been playing R&B since 1952, writing it since 49, and emceeing rock's first stage shows since March of 52. He was the first, most colorful, most controversial kingmaker of them all. It was Alan Freed who took the black expression rockin' and rollin' and applied it to the music he played.
Oh, yeah, Roy Milton on Specialty and Make Me Know It. All right, the old Moondog is beating it out, folks, and the old Moondog Rock and Roll Party on Tuesday night is just getting underway. Got a long way to go. 2.5 hours of your favorite blues and rhythm record show for all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom from the Midwest to the East Coast. Now, George Mr. Blues Jackson on the Atlantic label, and I'm sorry. Sing a song, George.
He copyrighted the phrase and promoted rock and roll regularly from that time on. He would sing along with the records, pounding out the beat and setting the example for all other disc jockeys. He was an instant success on WINS, but they made him stick to playing whitewashed R&B. He was not allowed to play the real stuff. The stuff Hank Ballard was writing.